Well, I'm going to get started since I have quiet here at my house for the moment, and I can't promise that that will stay. I am at home tonight, so if I get interrupted or if there's any crazy sounds, I'm so sorry. I have made sure my children know that they're not supposed to come into this room, but we'll see. So our purpose in meeting tonight is to talk about Final Project Part 2. I know that Heather told me that she's looked at all the Part 1s, so if people have questions about those, we can talk about them as well. But we want to walk through some of the major pieces of Part 2 and the main questions that people have about Part 2 to try and kind of answer some of those up front. So I have a PowerPoint that I'll go through, I think, of the things that I kind of thought of to put in here. And Heather, you can jump in at any time. The purpose of the Part 2 of the final project, there's two real purposes in our development of this. One is for you to demonstrate that you can apply the MCCS literacy standards and the theory that you chose to planning and instruction in the context of science content. We've talked a lot about that. There have been a lot of examples that have been brought up in the discussion boards, but this is really intended to give you the opportunity to demonstrate that you can do that. And then the second purpose is actually to give you a final project that can be useful to you in your work. In developing this, you kind of are showing you're showing your yourself and along with us that you can do it, but then you also have this product that you can use. I think it's really important for me to note that our primary evaluation is on how you're using literacy standards and the theory, not on your overall lesson or unit writing skills. That said, it's really important that a well-written lesson or unit is easier for us to evaluate, and so it can end up with a higher score. And so our rubric doesn't have anywhere that is directly evaluating your lesson writing abilities, but that definitely has a factor in what your score ends up being. So the basic sections in Part 2, you have your unit overview and one full lesson plan, and that's worth most of the score. But then you also have a little explanation that's pretty short of where you see your MCCS alignment as and where you see your theory application. And of course, those are things that you wouldn't necessarily have attached to your lesson plan, but we've put them in there so that we can give you the chance to be really explicit about what we should be seeing. So I'm going to just go through the unit itself, the overview page for the unit, and then the instructions for the lesson plan to highlight things that either are commonly misunderstood or are more or less important. Some basic guidelines, though, and it says this in the assignment sheet, is that there's no minimum length or maximum length for the unit. You want to focus on covering the content completely, on making sure you have that alignment to the MCCS, not on, how many lessons there are, how many weeks it takes. We've seen successful units that are very short and very long. That's not really the key factor. And then also remember that you're only being asked to do one full lesson plan. But the unit itself in the overview really needs to show a progression that would cover the material. So what we don't want to see is where you've really only thought about one lesson within the unit and you're just kind of saying, yeah, I do some stuff before and do some stuff after, but this is the only part that I've fleshed out. We want to make sure that the unit itself shows some progression and makes sense. And then another really important thing is that it doesn't need to be new. You can use this as an opportunity to develop something new, but you may just want to take something you've used in the past and either make slight modifications, rewrite it, and then add in that explanation piece that we ask for. But it doesn't need to be developed just for this class. We've included a sample format that you're welcome to use. I know not everybody has a unit overview format that they use for their unit writing. And not everybody writes lessons every day either. It really depends on in some cases personal preference, and in some cases district guidelines. But if you don't have something that we've included that format. If you are going to use your own, I would just encourage you to make sure that you have the key pieces are still in there. And I'll walk through that format so that you're kind of reminded what the key pieces would be. Up until this point, does anybody have any major questions? Or Heather, do you have anything you want to chime in with?
I don't. You're doing a great job, Chris.
Oh, good. Just so everyone knows, if I'm at all out there, I had surgery yesterday, so I'm still a little bit foggy today, but I think I'm doing pretty good. I think I'm tracking well. And it wasn't major surgery. I've been I broke my arm bone 3 years ago, and they haven't ever quite gotten it fixed right, so it's just hopefully the last time they ever go in to try and fix it. Okay, so the top of the unit overview, and my intent in going through the unit overview, the template that we've provided is to really highlight which things are essential and which things you can drop out, which things you can say, I don't really want to include this. It's not something I usually include. And which things we actually, if you don't have it, it might cause a problem. So the content area, what we're looking for here is something beyond science, like content would be the solar system, or something within science that gives us some idea which area within science we're headed for here. And then the unit title would be what you would tell kids or administrators or parents that this unit's called. The target course or grade level, that's really helpful for us to be reminded. I know in the message boards and in the discussions, we've heard it all semester, what levels you teach, but to just be reminded as we're looking at the lesson, what grade levels this would be applied to, or what specific subject area. The unit summary is important to have that 2 or 3 sentence statement about what you're going to cover in the unit. It gives us a sense of when we're looking at that unit progression further down, what kind of scope you're looking to hit in this unit. And with the rationale, it's really great to have that piece where we understand where that would be included. So even if these are categories that you don't normally include, I would recommend including these for this because it gives us that kind of bird's eye view perspective as we do our grading. The next thing in there is the science standards, the ELA standards. Those 2 are essential, and I just want to say up front, we have a lot of trouble with the science standards, mostly because my statement is you can use whatever science standards you want, and I think that confuses people, that freedom of it. I think during the course we've given you a couple different times where we've shown you what science standards are. I'm glad to send out a list of links of places you might find the science standards. But mostly I want you to go with what your district is using. And so, because that can be really variable around the state. Right now we have some districts that are using NGSS. We've talked a little bit about the framework and NGSS in this class. If that's something you want to align to, go for it. If your district is using the old standards, align to those. If your district uses the ELEs or a district curriculum document, you can align to that. Just make sure you tell us how we could reference the thing you've aligned to, so that we can go and look it up if we're unclear. I think one time somebody just aligned to standard 1.3, and I had no idea which document that was coming from, and so it became a really big deal to have to go and find it. So whatever science standards you want to use, just make sure it's clear. The MCCS ELA standards, that's where you're aligning to what we covered in week 3. And then the last 3 things that are in this outline, I think it's less important that you include those. So if what you usually do doesn't include essential questions or learning targets or statements about what students will know and students will be able to do, if you include something else like that, that's fine. Those aren't... These are things that when I look at people's lesson plans, kind of generally, I see a lot of different ways that districts or, lesson plan formats get at those ideas. So the wording on those other sections isn't as important. But again, the standards are definitely not optional. And you do have to have alignment to both science and ELA standards. And then the bottom half of the unit design, it asks you to explain about what your summative assessment will be. Your summative assessment will probably not be covered in your lesson plan because you're probably going to do a lesson plan that's not the final. I mean, if you're doing the final lesson in your unit, then the summative assessment might be in there, but you're very likely not going to be having your summative assessment in your lesson plan. So making sure you've made it clear in this overview what the summative assessment will be. Equipment needed, teacher resources, it's kind of up to you whether you would be wanting to list all of this here or you'd list it in individual lessons. I know that I always listed my equipment for the whole unit in one place so that I could get it all ready. Formative assessments, you should be listing those. And even though you may also be referencing them in your unit, we would like to see, especially because it'll tie into some of the theory, what other types of formative assessments you might be using during your unit, even beyond what just is going to be specifically called out in your one lesson. And then the lesson plans, where it shows kind of the progression of lessons, that's what lets us see that your unit makes sense as a whole, outside of just the one lesson that we'll see the detail for. And the teacher notes, if you don't have anything to put in there, that's fine. But the curriculum development resources, that's really important. We do not care if you are using other people's work to build your lesson. Or your unit, but it's really important that you reference that work if you are using it. I know last semester we had one lesson in particular that I can think of that we really struggled with because there was clearly an incorporation of somebody else's lessons, and it made it really hard for us to read and follow. And we had to go back to the original source to be able to even really understand what was going on. And so it's really important if you're going to do that and incorporate other people's work that you make reference to it to help us out. And also because we should just always cite other people's work if we're going to use it. So that's the overview of the unit, and that is probably one of the things we get the most questions about because a lot of times people don't do an overview to their unit when they're just planning. Does anybody have questions about the unit overview? Anything that I skipped over that you'd like more information about?
This was going to seem kind of silly, but I still get confused between summative and formative assessment. Could you clarify that for me, please?
Yeah, so summative assessment, my rule of thumb is summative assessment is what I'm using at the end to decide what my students learned before I move on, right? It's generally what I use to assign a final grade. It's where I have my students show me their mastery. And a lot of times in schools, summative assessment is a test, right? Formative assessment are the assessments that I use along the way to tell myself and my students where we are in terms of being ready for that summative assessment. And so technically the definition of formative assessment is that it's a process that we use to determine where our learning is. And I think that I can get on a really big, huge soapbox about misuse of the term formative assessment. But I would say that when people talk about using exit slips, that's a great example of a formative assessment. Or if people talk about having, group work where they're going to check in with each other and then report out, that's a great formative assessment for both the student and the teacher. And that's where that formative assessment becomes important depending on which of the theories you're using. In some of the theory choices that you could pick, there's a lot of types of formative assessment that really should be going on in the classroom. In terms of kind of like in inquiry, there's some really key pieces of inquiry that are opportunities for formative assessment along the way. And so what you're putting in for formative assessment for the bigger picture of your unit can really support your use of the theory.
Okay.
Was that helpful?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Okay, so let's look at the information for the lesson plan.
Chris, sorry.
Oh, yeah. Yeah?
Sorry.
there we go. Can we just type right on this, or is it a PDF, or?
Oh yeah. If there's not a Word document up there, we should put it up there. I mean, I have it in a Word document that you can type right into. So.
I'm just double checking. Sorry, I'm too lazy to go into the class.
No, yeah, I can go in when we're done today and upload a Word document if it's not up there.
Okay,
It never occurred to me to wonder if I did that, so I'm glad that you checked. So for the lesson plan, again, there's no minimum or maximum length. And if you think about it, and again, I know I said this last time about why we don't provide a sample. If you teach kindergarten, your normal lesson plan length is going to be way different than if you teach high school. Just in period time alone, you have a huge difference in that structure. And so I want you to do a lesson that makes sense for your students, not trying to fit some length guideline. And then just like the unit, you want to really focus on covering the content you say that you're teaching, and doing that alignment to the MCCS and using the theory. And here's the thing is that you're doing that unit plan overview, and we're going to be able to see in the unit plan overview some degree of the use of MCCS and the use of the theory, but you're really showing that to us in the lesson. So make sure the lesson that you decide to highlight and flesh out all the way definitely has those two things in it. You don't want to be relying on the fact that you mentioned it back in your unit plan. It should definitely be in that one lesson. And again, it doesn't need to be newly developed. You can take something that you've done in the past and kind of integrate in more of the theory or more of the reading and writing stuff, and use that. You don't have to be writing something new. And again, we've given you a lesson plan that you can use. But the really important things in this one, and I'll say this again as we go through it, but is making sure that you show that alignment, and you show your theory by describing your learning activities and describing your assessment. So if you have a lesson plan format that you use that articulates theory or articulates alignment to standards, and that goes through and really says, this is my plan for how I'm going to teach this, then you're fine to use that. We've just, again, included one because we know not everybody has one that they use. So in the one that we've included, it shows the lesson plan. Again, you're going to tell us the content area, the target grade level, the parent unit, which of course then refers back to the unit overview that you've already given us, and then a lesson summary and lesson rationale. And again, the same reason for those as in the unit is that we really want to know what we're supposed to be looking for, what you think we should be looking for. And sometimes it is hard. Sometimes they don't match up, and having this really gives us a guide to help us. Remember, I said in the beginning, we're not grading you on your unit writing or your lesson writing skills, but having this has really helped people's grades sometimes because it's helped us to navigate through some units and lessons that are written by people who really don't write lessons a lot, and so they are a little bit rough. You've already articulated in your unit what the science standards and the ELA standards would be for the whole unit. In some cases, it's going to be the exact same thing listed here, but in some cases, what you're going to have here is a shorter list because you wouldn't be covering everything in just this one lesson. And the same things about the bottom parts. If you're used to doing essential questions, learning targets, students will know you should still include those, but if that's not something you're used to, you have something else you're comfortable with, you can go with that. In your unit or your lesson, you're really going to articulate evidence of learning. What your pretest would be, what your formative assessment would be, what your post-test would be, and then your instruction and assessment plan, where you'll list out all the things that you're doing during the lesson. I really love step-by-step and bulleted lists. They're easier to read versus paragraphs and narratives are a little bit harder for me. That's a personal preference. And then materials and resources needed. And then listing the learning activities and the formative assessments that go with them, and then notes for the teacher. And that's all of it that's on there. So you can see that within the lesson plan, really that kind of description of what you're doing in the lesson is the big idea. This format isn't quite as important as that unit format is. It has less sections to it. Are there questions about the lesson itself?
I'll just take a minute to say while you were talking there, Chris, I went and put a Word document version of the template on the course, so that is now there.
Thank you so much, Heather.
Yeah, no problem. It's of both the unit overview and the lesson plan. It's all in one document, so if you guys want to just download that and type right in there, you've got it.
Perfect. The other two parts of the assignment are these kind of little descriptions, and the description of the Common Core alignment is just 400 to 600 words. That's not really a lot of words. I've said, 20 times that number of words today right now. The key thing when we're evaluating this is that what you listed for your MCCS standard in your unit, that we saw that play out, and that's the same thing that you're saying here. And really what you're doing here is you're saying, I've aligned to these Common Core standards because, and you're explaining that to us. You're showing us that you can articulate that, and then we're making sure that that matches with what we actually saw in your lesson plan. It's not a really terribly formal thing in that way. It really is just kind of you stating it for us. And then also, if you have anything in here, if you are making any references either here or in the other section about the theory, you should reference them if you need to. Often these come in and there's no need for a reference. And where there are needs for reference, it's usually here in this application to the theory that, you are re-referencing something that you've said in part one. And the big thing that we're looking for in the 400 to 600 words about describing how this applies to the theory is that you actually are describing the same theory that you described in part one. That's a pretty simple thing to check. And then also that you're describing it correctly still. Whatever you said in part one, if it was correct, it's still correct here. And then that we actually saw that in the unit somewhere. And so really you're using about 400 words to explain to us what we should be seeing in the unit and how you think that ties back to the theory. Again, it's not really formal. It's just a way for you to articulate that and verbalize that for us. And then we have the rubric, and in the rubric you can see your unit is worth 30 points. That's the bulk of the grade here. And then it's 10 points each for those two, explaining your alignment to the reading and writing standards and explaining your application of the theory. And within the bullets for the unit design, you can see that the unit overview really outlines the purpose of the unit, the alignment to the standards, and the assessment plan, and the progression of lessons. That's what we're looking for in that unit overview. And that the lesson outlines the purpose, the alignment to standards, the learning activities, and relevant assessment. And then we're looking for the progression of lessons with, sorry, that third bullet should have been deleted out. We used to have more than one lesson written out, but that the progression that you show in your unit would lead to the stated goals. And then that the unit reflects what you're answering in 1 and 2. That's what we're looking for. So again, we're not looking for a perfectly written unit. We're looking for units that really reflect what you've learned in the course. And that is all that I have in the PowerPoint. So are there other questions? Or Heather, do you have any tips or things that you've seen while grading? I mean, I think for me the biggest tip is that making sure that you feel really comfortable with your answers to question 1 and 2. Because if you really, that's from what I've seen, if those question 1 and 2, if those answers are really clear to you, then your unit's probably fine. That's my big tip. Do you have any, Heather?
Well, I would say based on everyone's work on part 1, it seems like folks have a really good grasp of the theories and how they relate to science. So I think that you guys all are on the right track so far with the part 1s. So I'm not too worried about these part 2s coming in with any big holes. The biggest thing I would point out is in a couple of previous times there have been confusion with MCCS. It is Montana Common Core standards, so please don't confuse that with the science standards when you are addressing question 1. This is where we're looking at the reading and writing, the literacy skills. But I'd say we could probably open it up for questions, because I think from what I've seen so far, you guys are really doing a great job and on a good track. So does anyone have any questions for us?
Well, I would like to take the opportunity to say to you guys, thank you for a great semester. I have been really excited. I know that I haven't been commenting on the discussion boards every week, but I've been really excited by all of the reflections that you guys have put up and the great work that you've done. And I know you guys still have a big assignment left, this final unit plan, but I'm really thrilled with the course this semester, and we will be offering the course again this summer. And so if you know people who would enjoy taking the course or would benefit from it, or kind of anything like that, we will be announcing the date soon.
If we have any questions, can we just email you or something like that?
Oh yes, for sure. If you have questions today, you can ask them, but if you have questions as you're going along, just email. Well, thank you all for everything, and if there aren't any other questions today, I'm going to let you guys go. It's a beautiful day outside, and yeah, email if you have questions between now and the final project. And the thing about grades is, when you see your grade in, that we got a lot of questions about this last semester, you'll see your grade in Moodle, and you'll get an email from me saying that I've submitted everything to the university. The university will not automatically send you anything that verifies your credit. They, I am not the university though, so I can't send you anything that verifies your credit. So once you've gotten something from me that says I've turned in your grade, the university has been told you have credit, you can request a transcript from them, and they'll send that to you. But they don't automatically do it unless you ask. So once the course is done and you get the thing, for those of you that are taking this for credit, once you get that email from me, and the OPI form, Lindy, you will get that probably a week after the course ends. I'll mail them out to everyone. I'll mail those to you around the same time that you get the emails from me saying that I've submitted grades to the university. So, yeah. That's the most common question after this is, what about my credits?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Have a great night.